G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we are going through some points of difference. We are talking pods and which ones are the ones you want to start, which ones are the ones probably avoid. Let's go!
Hodge has done it from nowhere. Hodge in the goal from inside the 10. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty.
Hey, welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast as we, learn how to podcast for the first time ever. I am your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. And joined, as always, the golden tonsils himself, Luke Rogerson. How are you, mate?
We've done this so many times and we still just can't consistently get it right, hey?
Yeah,
hey.
well,
And I think it's your fault.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're looking fresh, by the way, mate. Those new headphones are doing wonders for your complexion.
Probably, yeah.
Just to give everyone some context,
A little bit bulkier
these are
than
the
normal.
old muffs that Mitch was getting around in.
The day oneers.
That's a guy who loves getting the headset on. So we got him some new muffs, and he's.
I feel a bit bulkier than normal. I feel like I'm, like you said, the Nova guy.
You look good, mate. And
Thank you.
I can see you're ready to spit some hot takes. So let's get into it, eh?
Hot takes, and we're going to try and go off the beaten path a little bit today. Now, we have talked about some of these guys, but some of these guys we haven't talked about just yet. So today we are going to be talking about some point of difference players. All of these players are under 10% owned. We've got 10 guys we're going to go through. They'll be in an order of such, but obviously we are still a bit far out. We're just ticked over into February now, so take the order with a pinch of salt. So I'm going to go through 10 players starting at number 10. Ollie Wines of the Port Adelaide Power, who currently is in 2.27% of teams in AFL Fantasy at the moment for a player who won a Brownlow, 3 years ago? Yeah. He is coming in priced at an average of 77.7. He did play the 23 games last year, 29 years of age, 701,000. Your thoughts on old mate Squareface?
Lego head. For me, Ollie Wines strikes me as one of those sort of inexplicable cases in a little bit. You know how we always talk about the fact that we want to be able to sell the narrative to ourselves of why something's happening. I kind of find it hard to work out why Ollie Wines went from dominating Brownlow medalist to what we're seeing now. I know maybe there's a slight reduction in the CBA percentage with obviously the rise of Butters and Rosie, but I can't sell myself on that turning around because we know how good Butters and Rosie are. So for me, it's a no. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I've heard a lot of people talk about them being quite bullish on Ollie Wines, and there is a bit of reporting going on at the moment that he is moving back more into the midfield. He was a player who played 50% of the CBAs last season. However, their biggest CBA attendee last season was Connor Rosie, who was at 69%. So this is not midfield where their top guys are going 80%.
Yeah.
These are players like Rosie, Butters, Horne-Francis, Wines, Drew, a little bit on a lesser extent, Boak last season, that all get a very semi-even slice of the pie. Yeah. So if I throw it back over to you, who do you see in the stoppage and in the CBAs more? Do you think he's getting ahead of a Butters or a Rosie? Is he higher than either of those guys?
Well, this is the thing. I think if you asked any Port Adelaide fan, you said, who do you want to be the future backbone of your midfield? Who's going to be leading the charge in your next premiership? I don't think many people are going to say Ollie Wines. I think most people are going to go Butters and Rosie. So I feel like that would be the story they're selling themselves at Port Adelaide as well. So I can't sell myself on that one. There's other pods that we're about to talk about that I can get on board, but I reckon.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat. He is at 50% CBS. I can see that coming up, maybe as high as 60%, but I don't think that's going to justify him jumping back up in price. What I can do is I think, explain a little bit as to why he's fallen off over the last year or two. And it comes from the fact that Port Adelaide has dramatically changed their game style. In 2022, they were the third highest scoring team when it comes to fantasy points, and not very much behind number 1 and 2. So in 2022, Geelong and St Kilda were the only teams that scored more fantasy points than them. They averaged 1,581 fantasy points, but in 2023, they were, bit of a drum roll, dead last in AFL fantasy scoring for the entire team. So they went
dead last with 2 relevant midfielders.
Exactly.
Too,
so they've got 2 guys up the top there, and the rest really shared it. Port Adelaide went down from 1581 down to 1444. So they've lost over 100. What's that? 140 points basically from their team total.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got a rise of 2 other gun midfielders who have both jumped up their average by nearly 20 points essentially themselves. So those 2 things combined, I think it doesn't paint a good picture for a player like Ollie Wines. And plus, they played good. It worked for them. They were right up the top there when it came to the home and away season. Fell a little bit short in the finals, but I think, like you said, if you're looking towards the future, Butters, Rosie, and even probably Jason Horne-Francis as well. That's your midfield. You're building around those 3.
Yeah.
Wines is in there as a bigger body and inside guy, but
he's not suddenly vaulting
not
up
at
to
the
80%.
expense of those guys, I don't think. Would be my take. So, just like you, I am a big old
Fuck no.
on Ollie Wines, and
That's good. I like that. We've any Ted Lasso fans out there, we've added the Roy Kent to
the Roy Kent effect.
Well, you didn't like the Steve Carell?
Well, we had a few comments saying that it was a bit long, and
What do you mean?
I can't understand it either. But
The average podcast length just vaulted when we had the Steve Carell.
Yeah, so
but now we have to put explicit tags on all our videos, but you and I
fuck.
don't normally swear,
yeah,
so
no shit, we can't.
it's probably
Yeah, damn it. Okay, well, start this one again. We'll have to go with another cleaner one because we don't swear on this podcast.
I don't realise how potty mouthed we are until I sometimes listen to us back, and I go, "Oh, I've got to get that out of my game."
Nah, you know what I say to that?
Fuck no.
All right, let's move on to the next player. So, yeah, we're both not very keen on Ollie Wines, and I don't really see myself budging from that one. However, you might be, and I might be, a bit keen on this guy at number 9, Alex Witherden from the West Coast Eagles. Explain yourself.
Well, I want to firstly say that I think I early on was a bit too dismissive of that West Coast backline and perhaps didn't do enough diligent research. But listening to the great Statesman and then Holmesy on a recent pod that they did, I realised that I just need to pull my finger out and do a little bit more digging, because I think that there's going to be somebody there that picks up some of the points left off by Hearn, and maybe picking who that guy is could go a long way to vaulting you up the rankings.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that to be the case. And there's a new feature, if anyone hasn't caught on as well, go over to dfsaustralia.com, and there's a new feature that they've got there, which is their with or without stats.
That's a good feature.
Which is a great feature there. And if we plug in the with or without stats with Shannon Hearn, one of the biggest beneficiaries is Alex Witherden. With Shannon Hearn in the team, he averaged 77.6.
Yeah.
So his average that he's priced at this season is 78.4. But without Shannon Hearn, he averaged 84.9. Plus, there are two games in there in round 13 and round 15 where they also were without a bunch of their key defenders, and Alex Witherden actually had to mark up. I believe one of them was on Buddy, and one of them was on Tex Walker.
Good luck, eh?
We don't expect that to be his role a lot moving forward. So if you remove a couple of those games, he was probably closer to a 90 averaging player, which when you price it around that sort of 77, 78 mark, a 90 average or even a little bit more than that
Could get you pretty close to that top 6 defenders.
Is a pretty good return, and someone doesn't have an early buy. It's something to keep an eye on. Now, I guess some of the questions that people might have, and I'll throw this over to you for your thoughts, like, is he locked and loaded in their best 22 every single week? Because that's sometimes been his issue as a guy who maybe is a better fantasy football player than a real-life football player in terms of his decision-making.
I get the feeling he is, especially with the out of Hearn now as well. I think he'd have to be doing someone dirty to not get his spot there. For me, there's a little bit of a question mark over where Duggan plays and how that influences Witherden as well. So there's obviously a little bit of talk that Duggan might be destined for a little bit more midfield time, which I think obviously would then point to Witherden perhaps picking up some points. But then if Duggan is playing more across the back line, then there's an argument to be said that maybe he's the guy who picks up a little bit of a bump. So I think for fantasy coaches, we probably prefer it to be Witherden because he's cheaper.
Yes,
but there are a couple of other names floating around there that may get the bump as well. So it'll be really interesting to watch them in the preseason.
The other thing I'll say is he played 22 games last season. Like he was in there a fair bit, and that was with Shannon Hearn playing a bunch of those games as well.
Yep.
You lose Shannon Hearn. You've picked up... Have they really picked up anyone that's going to threaten his role in the team? I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. No. But I don't believe that him playing 22 games, all of a sudden you lose a veteran like Shannon Hearn, a player like Witherden, his role is worse than last year. So I feel like he's best 22. I actually... Watching him last year in some games, I actually thought that he did a lot better of the stuff that he was heavily criticised for in previous seasons, where I do think he was being a bit more like team-focused, defending a bit more one-on-one contests and things like that. And the fact that he's been willing to do those jobs where he's, mashed up on someone like a Buddy, to me, bodes well for his chances to just stay in the team. So I personally am not super concerned about him staying locked into the side. Yeah. There have been some things on Twitter that maybe make me question that a little bit, but at the moment, I still think he is someone that I'm pretty confident is going to be there around 1 and for most of the season. He's only 25 years old.
And I don't want to talk about these guys in too much depth. We'll never get out of here. But obviously some speculation about what Harley Reid's going to be doing throughout the year. Yep. So if he's in playing off halfback, there could be a concerted effort to say, hey, let's get this guy. Like he's their poster boy. That
could be the one.
They're pinning the season. So let's say he plays halfback. Where's Yeo going to be playing? I even was doing some listening. Is it going to be like a Yeo Reid sort of
I've heard that too.
Switch. So a few things up in the air, but there's going to be somebody getting some points at West Coast, and we want to know who it is. So
speaking of the great Yo-Yo man himself, Elliot Yeo comes in at number 8, and I'll be honest, man, he's not really someone I was considering when we were doing our early research, and our defenders were our first position that we looked at. And honestly, I kind of skipped over him.
There's something psychological about it, don't you think?
There's something psychological, but there's some real data to back it up, I will say. But I've been listening to podcasts, and there's little bit of hype out there.
Think about how entrenched he was in everyone's teams prior to the hamstring.
Yeah, he was. He was locked in there, and that hamstring, it was a hamstring, right? That he ruled him out at the start of the season.
I'm pretty sure it was.
And that was obviously something that probably saved us in the end. But he is at 6.23% owned at the moment, 633,000, priced at an average of 70 flat. He's 30 years old. Reports are he's playing in the midfield, like you said. I have seen also reports that he's going to be rotating with Harley Reid off the halfback and in the midfield. They've got a bit of a swap there. Well, first of all, what do we need to see from Elliot Yeo? I don't know if comfortable is the right word, because I don't know if you're ever going to be comfortable, but for you to launch into it.
Well, can I, if I put it this way, I don't, at risk of oversimplifying it, if you can guarantee me that he's not getting injured, he's in my team.
Is it that simple?
Well, I think it is that simple. He's guaranteed to be playing midfield, from what I've heard.
Yes.
And if we thought he was value last year, he's priced the same this year. So the only thing for me that is preventing us from getting straight into this is the injury history.
Yeah, I think, and some people have floated this one out, and I'll get your thoughts, because I do believe there's some merit to it. No,
he plays for Essendon.
Good one. It's the old classic.
You got to go back to the well sometimes.
Best 18 in 4 of the first 6 rounds. So say, for example, in round 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, he does come out ping a hammy in the first quarter. He's going to have a terrible score. Any year, that would be disastrous. And this season, however, you've got the best 18, so his score potentially drops off. And you've got a few other chances at having a decent score if you're not worried about him. So is that something that you're factoring in or take into account that maybe just gives a little bit more of a nudge in his direction?
I mean, it probably does. We shouldn't do this podcast because I can see myself walking out of here with 18 pods in my team.
Yeah.
You can find a way to sell yourself on a lot of these guys, can't you? That probably brings up a good discussion point. How many pods can you have, do you think?
That's a good question. Look, what I try to do, and we are doing this Point of Difference podcast personally, my rule is that pre-season, I don't want to look at percentages. I don't want to look at ownership percentage. I want to make every decision based off every player's individual merit and their individual kind of he does play for Essendon, but for everyone's individual talent and upside. And for me especially, I want to just remove that ownership equation. It may be something that is a bit of a tiebreaker for me, but on a player like Elliot Yeo, it can be disastrous, really.
Yeah,
like if you're thinking of like what could go wrong, if you're on that island alone, talk about the Sherry Island last season, if you're on the Elliot Yeo Island on yourself, like you're going to want some pretty serious upside to take that risk. And personally, I don't know if I can do it. If he comes out and just absolutely blitzes the preseason games and looks $1 million, maybe I consider it if other options I were also considering don't live up to what I expect them to be. But it would have to take something a fair bit for me to go there.
I think it's a fair summary. We should move on to the next person.
Fuck no.
Not to you, but to Elliot Yeo. All
We
right,
still don't have a fence sitting sound effect.
We don't sit on fences here, mate. Number 7 here is a bit of a different price point to some of these other guys. This guy is by no means value. He is expensive, but what he is an absolute fantasy gun.
Yeah.
Rowan Marshall is the guy we're going to talk about next, and he is probably the highest owned of these guys, but at 7.9%. What is he, the third highest averaging player in the season last year, and no early buys. He's on that ruck line. Is he the greatest pod this season as a guy who's a genuine captain option? You mentioned on the Ruck podcast, he only went under 100 like 4 times.
4 times. That was the interesting thing. I think when people talk about paying up for rucks, like the general statement is, are we paying up for English? Like, we can't forget that this guy has effectively done what English did last year. And like I said, English went under 100 off the top of my head, was 8 times?
Something like that. Yeah, more than Marshall. Yeah.
Super high floor, of course, for English. But, like, Marshall was right there with him. So, if you are of the mindset of, hey, I just want to pay up for my rucks, maybe you want to go like you were thinking of going an English Gawn combo or something like that.
Maybe one high, one a bit more value.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely not talk somebody out of making it Marshall instead of English. So
I'll tell you one thing. There's no reports of him having migraines in the preseason.
He's locked in, laser focused.
Is there any threat of someone like a Max Heath or a Jack Hayes or something like that eating into his role a little bit? Or is he one of those guys that's in the exclusive club that is Ross the Boss's boys? Is he in that group that he's just going to get whatever he can?
I get that feeling. I don't feel as though Heath is going to come in and steal any time. The Hayes one worries me a little bit because of Hayes' versatility to play forward. Let's say they pick Hayes. Hayes plays predominantly forward, but then in any given game, or maybe Hayes gets a little bit more ruck time, suddenly that maybe lowers Marshall's ceiling a little bit because Marshall was doing it all himself.
Everything,
wasn't he? So maybe that's a valid point that you bring up. It'd be interesting to see what they do with Hayes throughout the preseason. That might give us a little indication on that one. I personally and probably haven't looked down the Marshall road, but if you were one of those people...
More a structure thing though, right? Like you're looking at those cheaper options.
I mean, since when have we had ruck options to look at? That's the thing. I'm not personally doing it, but if you were looking at paying up, don't forget Rowan Marshall.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you are in that market for an expensive ruck, and if you are considering Tim English, by all means, I do think you should also consider Rowan Marshall, whose ownership is considerably lower. The next player here I have seen in your team here and there. I'm not sure if he's in there right now, but Dylan Stephens of the North Melbourne Kangaroos, who previously was of the Sydney Swans. He is someone who I think is something to it. Only 2.4% ownership. And again, one of those cheaper guys under 500k at $496. What do we think about Dylan Stephens, and what do you expect his role to be in this season?
Well, I'm not 100% on what the role will be, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I love the fact that he comes from the Swans. I feel like the Swans have that culture, that template, that guys go there, they might not get an opportunity in the Swans take midfield, and then they take their skills somewhere else. So I've said that a couple of times. But for me, like, he was in a trade to the Roos. Like, the Roos wanted him, so I think there's a role there for him. And if that role involves a little bit of midfield time and some CBAs, I can see him going pretty well. We mentioned on our previous podcast, he actually, since 2021, when he's been playing in the VFL, has gone at 105 over over those 2 or 3 years. So I know he's played a bit of AFL in that time, so it's been sporadic bursts in the VFL.
Yeah.
But to do that over a 3-year period, I think is pretty impressive. So I'm really keen to see what he can do, and for his sake, I hope he goes well.
So he's coming off the back of a 1% CBA rate from the Swans last season. So
try to get in that. Try to get in the Swans midfield. Good
just
luck.
Not going to happen.
Callum Mills can't get in the Swans midfield.
So yeah, if Callum Mills is playing off halfback, you've got no chance. So obviously that's basically fuck all in the midfield. So you've definitely got a better chance over at North Melbourne. So I can't see that doing anything but going up. And like you mentioned, he's got a good scoring pedigree in the junior levels and in the state league. So
it's like a top 5 draft pick or something.
I think he was number 5, if I am correct there. Yes, round 1, pick 5, 2019.
That
national
ability
draft,
doesn't just go away.
Yeah, I mean he's 23 years old, so still young. And look, he's averaged over a 12-game season in 2022, 66, priced at 55. So. And yeah, playing at a club where he's probably higher up the pecking order, it is one to watch.
What are your thoughts? Because you've heard mine.
Well, I just don't know what his role is, because I think what you're going to see is LDU in the middle. I think George Wardlaw is probably going to be their second highest guy in the CBAs. How much? There's a world where he's third. Sheasel. I mean, maybe it comes down to how healthy is Fisher. Like, is Fisher healthy? Maybe if Fisher's not there, Sheasel's still in that back line. Maybe, I mean, I don't know. I'm spitballing there. But that third, fourth, fifth midfield for me for the North is very open-ended, like Jai Simkin. You've got Sheasel, like you mentioned. Someone like Stevens.
I wonder whether they just run a lot of guys at low percentage.
Will Phillips. Who was their other draftee that... McKercher, no, a couple of years ago. They've got a couple of guys that haven't really panned out yet, but they're still young enough that they're going to continue to try and see what they've got there. Yeah. So it is a little bit up in the air, but again, it wouldn't surprise me if he comes out and he is like their third or fourth guy in the CBA rotation, but I'm going to have to want to see it first. But definitely on my watch list, and he's cheap enough that you can have a punt on him.
I want to ask you about the next guy, because early on in the preseason, I know this guy actually spent a little bit of time at Mitchman.
Yes, he did.
I think it was more aspirational than anything, but now maybe there's some confirms that Josh Rachele might see a little bit more midfield time. What are your thoughts?
Josh Rachele, yes. Again, another player. I wrote the Deca DT for Josh Rachele, and don't think many people were very keen on him. But
I thought you were going to say I don't think many people read it.
Probably not either. But he... I think what you're referring to, there's been some quotes today to say that he is expecting to spend some more midfield time. Now, I haven't been able to find, I think, what you told me before the podcast, but what I've seen is that in an interview, I think it was on SEN, he was saying that he expects and or wants to be close to that 50-50 midfield forward split. And basically from the research that I did, in any games where he went over 40% CBAs, he was a 90-plus averaging player. In the first 6 games, he went an average, I think, of 91 average, and that was in about 41% CBAs, which in this year's forward line, that's basically second only to Jack McRae, and only second by like 0.2. So if he is, in fact, that 40-plus, 50-plus% CBAs, I think he is a genuine starting option. Like we said, for the ownership, I think he's about, if I'm just double checking, he's about 6% owned, or 4% owned actually in AFL Fantasy. And from my eyes, I just think the Crows looked way more dynamic with him in there. They were 4-2 in those first 6 games when he was in there. And then they switched it up and they put Ben Keys in there to tag. And at the end of the year, they put in Matt Crouch, and he never really got a look back in. So it's very role dependent.
Adelaide's midfield dynamic is just intriguing how that happened, because you kind of assume, 2023, 2024 that teams want to be explosive through the midfield, and Adelaide, the way Adelaide's season panned out is
complete opposite.
Yeah, they kept making moves to almost make it less dynamic, but they were still playing reasonably good footy. So I mean, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is interesting, but I think it's super role dependent, because we saw obviously the floor when he wasn't playing that CBA roles.
Yes. It could go bad.
Killed Ellie's team with that, was it 27 or whatever he did. So it can go bad if the role changes. And that is another thing that maybe concerns me, is that obviously they switched it up last year at, drop of the hat. And we might be dropping hat if we if we haven't been our team.
Nice, well done. Play some sort of good sound effect.
I don't have one except for this.
That was
to myself. But definitely someone I'm considering, because I think he's a bit of a jet, and yeah, I think he is someone that we should definitely look at. We've got 4 more players to go through, and I'm going to group all 4 of these guys together because they're all from the same team, from the Hawthorn Hawks.
Podthorn.
The Podthorn Hawks. Josh Ward, Cam Mackenzie, Connor McDonald, and Karl Amon. Now, Karl Amon's maybe a little bit different to those first 3, but let's start with those first 3 because the linchpin of this all being the case and all being a watch is Will Day has had a stress injury or a stress fracture. I can't remember the wording.
Didn't he have the SIND or something? Or am I making shit up?
No, I believe it was a stress fracture or a stress injury in his foot, I believe, or his ankle. So,
how do you get an injury in your foot from stressing?
Mate, just that tapping under the table. He's just really
bad,
giving it.
Stressing.
But yeah, so we never like to see stress injuries, particularly to feet. Obviously, you're on your feet, obviously, to play footy. So
not what Tristan Jerry thought, but
no, he runs with his face. Yeah. And some quotes recently have basically called into question if he's going to be there for the first 4 rounds. I don't think it's been confirmed that he's out for the first 4 rounds, but the wording sort of made it seem like, well, don't be surprised if he's out for the first month of the AFL season. Right. So it's getting more positive for those other guys. I think everyone's first thought is to go straight to Josh Ward because he had the most CBAs last season. But Cam Mackenzie is the cheapest. He's also the one coming into his 2nd season. Connor McDonald, I believe, has the highest scoring upside. If he was the one, if they all had, say, 60% CBAs, I think Connor McDonald scores the most.
Okay.
Mackenzie and McDonald are both in our forward line, with Josh Ward being in our midfield.
That does make a difference.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yes. First of all, who do you think is most likely to get the bump? And second, to follow up on that, is there someone that you are watching more close than the others, or is it all just kind of a mishposh? We're just watching this Hawks midfield because, I mean, I suppose that is the answer. But what are your thoughts on like the first one?
Especially? Yeah, I don't mean to disappoint, but the honest answer is I don't know.
Boo! This is a podcast. Give us your hot takes, mate.
Sorry for being honest. It's up in the air. The thing that's interesting is, you mentioned, okay, Will Day potentially out to round 4. Let's say it is, he's confirmed out to round 4.
Yeah, let's go on that assumption, yeah.
Are you looking at this as like a 4-week play? Like, how are you sort of framing this up in your mind?
That's a good question. In the midfield, no. I don't want it to be a 4-week play.
If you pick Josh Ward...
If I pick Josh Ward, I don't want it to be under the assumption that he's only getting the bump for the 4 weeks. In the forward line, however, with the lack of talent and also the option that we've got some players coming off their bye, like a Sam Flanders in round 3.
Yeah, true.
I'm more inclined to just take a punt, figure the rest out after the fact, because I think my gut feel is that early in the season, I'm going to be using a lot of trades in my forward line, just because... And again, this can all change if preseason comes around and then someone really puts their hand up and it's just an obvious grab. But at this stage, I don't feel super confident in many options at all. So if there is a short-term play with one of these guys, Mackenzie or McDonald, even though McDonald's a little bit more expensive, I'm considering it because then maybe in 4 weeks I can flip them to a Flanders or something like that and ride the value for a little bit and just do something a little bit more tricky. The other thing is, it's also in the back of my mind, is you give these young guns like a foot in the door, and things can change real quick. I hate to pick on my boy Warple, but if Connor McDonald goes into that midfield, and reports are that he has been playing in the midfield. I know it's preseason, everyone's playing in the midfield, which does make sense, but our good friend David King says that Mackenzie and...
Our good friend?
Yeah, David King. He's the AFL Fantasy Journal of the year so far. This guy gets around to every club.
But he's not our good friend.
Yeah, he's my good friend. What are you?
Sorry.
No,
sorry,
I'm kidding. I don't know
you
the guy
introduce
personally.
me sometime? Or?
Yeah, maybe, if you're good. He says they're looking good, and I think that they're going to be second out if they perform the way I think they can perform to someone like a Warple. So Will Day coming back might actually push someone else out than those guys who get that opportunity. That's just my thinking. But does that weigh anything to you, or are you sort of not as keen as I am?
No, I'm a wait and see.
Wait and see.
Just, cards on the table. I'm a wait and see. I don't have anything on
so
it.
Of those guys, Connor McDonald is 3% owned. Cam Mackenzie, which really surprised me, 1% owned.
Okay.
He's only 439,000. Like, he's priced at 50 for a guy who I believe, again, top 10 draft pick, was in the midfield a little bit at times, few sub-affected games. He's bloody cheap. And who's the other guy? Ward is sitting there at 0.7%, under 1% owned, which, again, surprises me because of the injury that we know has happened to Warple. So I'm watching all of those guys with that role.
Injury today.
What did I say?
Warple.
Oh.
You just want that to... you prick.
I'm sorry, Warple. I really do love you, mate. Let's talk about the other guy, the last one of these Hawthorn Hawks.
Now, this guy I do
Karl
have an
Amon.
opinion on because what we saw at the end of the year from Karl Amon was ridiculous.
Yes.
So
massive scores.
Effectively gone at 110, over the last 5 after moving back to that halfback flank. So there's a couple of things at play, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, we probably expect Hawthorn to go a little bit more direct, but my kind of opinion there is that affects more Sicily than it would Amon. Like, if you want to go direct, well, you get the ball in Amon's hands because he breaks the lines. I imagine his meters gained in those games are reasonable as well. I think there was a little bit of chipping around, so caveat on that. I think there was a bit of chipping around that maybe inflated those scores.
So if you're going to go in and expect, I'm just bringing up his last 5 average here, which was astronomical. It was 114 in the last 5.
Yeah.
If you're going in and expecting that, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Yes, I think
but that's not to say that he's not a good pick still. Even if he goes, 15 points less than that, that's a 99 average. That's a top 6 defender.
Yeah.
And if he's mid only right now, but if he is in that role, he's going to get defensive status.
So that's it. If I see that role and I see something that's confirmed, we want him in that role, it's going to be hard, even without the defender status, I think, not to pick him. Like, when I look at my midfield there, he's M5. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at guys before him, Butters, Steele, LDU. It's not so far-fetched in my mind to imagine a world where in that role, Karl Amon could average the same amount as LDU. So if I think that I'm picking LDU as a guy who I think could potentially be value, well, Amon's $100,000 cheaper.
Yeah, he's under 800K.
I know I'm perhaps, connecting a few too many dots and being a little bit generous here, but I just think that there's something to it if he's in that role.
Yeah.
Maybe it leaves a dirty taste in your mouth because you're picking a guy in the midfield that you're expecting not to play midfield. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we've kind of faced some of these questions before in like a Jaden Short, but Jaden Short was more expensive than this. Like, he was priced in the low 90s, mid 90s, I think, from memory last season when we had a similar kind of conversation. He's even cheaper. I think he's like mid 80s is his price stat tag. So he's got a bit more scope to get to that upside and a bit more value. And if I look at the Hawthorn run as well, they come out against Essendon, Melbourne, Geelong, Collingwood, Gold Coast, and North Melbourne, all of which I would not describe any of them being particularly difficult matchups for defenders. There's no St Kildas or Bulldogs in there, which were the 2 friendliest matchups last year, but they're all solid. I don't think any of them really make you concerned. First 3 games are at the MCG. So, look, I like it. He's been training with my team. He's not there right now, but it is one to watch. The last thing I do want to touch on is that game style that you mentioned. I'll throw a stat your way. In the last 5 games of the season, Hawthorn's meters gained per disposal was 13.9. So, to give that a bit of reference, the Port Adelaide Power had an 18.3. The next lowest was Fremantle at 14.9, so a whole metre more, which is a fairly different jump. And someone like a West Coast was 15.5. So
there's plenty of backwards gear going on.
They were by far and away the lowest metres gained per disposal team. If I compare that to their full season, they were still dead last, but they were a full metre better than they were those last 5 games. So I do think, to really emphasise, he's not going 114.
Yeah. So in the preseason game, watch the role, but definitely watch Hawthorn's game style because that's going to give you the indication. Is that are we going quick? Are we hat kicking out a stoppage? What are we doing there? And if we see, hang on, this is not going to be conducive to scoring, then we probably have to put our hands up and say,
and you think players, teams, no matter where you expect them to be on the ladder, those first few games, they're going to be some of your more aggressive games of your season. Like, it's normally not till you know, okay, we're not going anywhere this season, that you kind of pack
You're
up
trying to
shop.
establish your game style.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the only thing that makes me hesitant is like we want him to start well.
Yeah.
Does that mean, you know, in the role that he's in, that maybe they are a bit more direct, especially early in the season? But we'll see. We'll see how it looks in the preseason games. So those are our pods. Under 10% for all of them. A lot of them really low, under 5% for the most part. Let us know if you have any other ones that you think we have forgotten. Try to touch on some new names, but also some names where we had some more news to talk about there. So drop them down in the comments if you've got anyone else you want to chat about. Anything before we close it out, Luke?
Nah, mate.
Finish it up here. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening.
Subscribe.
If you are, make sure you subscribe if you are enjoying our podcast. We have got plenty more coming up this preseason. Preseason games are very close and around the corner, guys. Nearly less than a month, just over a month till round 0. So not too much longer yet, guys. It's going to be a quick preseason. So drop that thumbs up, drop that 5-star rating and review, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.